Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, Scott Hammond and 100% Humboldt with my new best friend, Lori Dengler.
Hello.
Hi, Lori. How are you?
I am just fine.
Tell us your job, what you do, who you are, and where you came from.
Well, the best thing about my job is that I am officially retired. I came to Humboldt in 1978. That's when I began teaching in the geology department at then Humboldt State University.
Right.
And that turned into a 37-plus year career. Wow. I retired from teaching in 2015. I still have various grants and contracts. I still have an office on campus, which I try not to go to very often. But my academic background is geophysics. And I came in 1978 as a part-time temporary teaching person. At that time, the geology department was booming, and we needed lots of people. And the then department chair, he thought it would be nice to have a geophysics person. I was just finishing up my doctorate at Berkeley. And so I arrived, still not quite finished with writing my dissertation, but that was my introduction to Humboldt. And then I left for about a year where I did a postdoc at Stanford. Was very fortunate to come back and slide back into the geology department, got a permanent position a couple of years later. And the rest is history.
I was just thinking the rest is history. So Joni and I came up in 78 to Humboldt. And was there a Gary Carver in the department?
Yes, Gary was fabulous.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful department.
Yeah.
And Gary was certainly the emotional, the bigger than life, the most incredible field geologist I've ever been out in the field with. We've had a lot of very good field geologists, but Gary's enthusiasm level was over the top.
I remember.
And
yeah, we were in a program called Cluster.
Yes.
And he was a guest lecturer, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So those early days at Humboldt where they were experimenting with different forms of general ed and the cluster system. And that was kind of fading out when I arrived.
Yeah, that went away in, I think, 80 or 79 or 80.
Right.
I was amongst the last class.
Right.
Really fun, though. Great way to get your general ed at Humboldt.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you get 48 units in a school year, which was unheard of. So you're a professor emeritus.
I'm a professor emeritus.
Does that mean you get a free office? What does that include?
Well, you only get an office if you actually have grant support. Oh. And so I'm one of the relatively few emeritus faculty that are on campus fairly frequently. And because as I say, I continue to work on a number of grant projects, which require me to have an actual place on campus.
Very nice. Do they have you guest lecture still at Cal Poly? I was going to say Humboldt State.
I've been involved in the OLLI program pretty much every term. I do one of the OLLI Brown Bag talks. And if anyone is interested, the last 6 or 7 OLLI talks I've done are all, you can access those old talks. And I'll be doing another one this fall.
Very cool. So for those of us, well, I know what OLLI is. For those of us out there that don't know what OLLI is, I'll let you tell about it. So it's amazing. It's a great.
Right. It's the Osher Lifelong Learning Program. There are these OLLI programs in many, if not most, universities all over the country that provide a broad variety of programs from courses that are semester long. Some courses last a few weeks. Some are weekend field trips. They keep trying to get me to do one of the bigger courses. And I say, nope, I love my brown bags. And they do a series of brown bags. They go through the summer. In fact, there was just one, I think this Monday, on the Life Plan Humboldt senior cooperative housing project.
We had Dr. Ann Lindsay as one of our first guests.
Yes, I know Ann very well.
She's great, yeah.
And so the OLLI program is a wonderful way to explore things that perhaps you didn't get into in your busy working days.
Yeah.
But the Brown Bag Talks, anyone can listen into. The link is right on the website.
Oh.
And you just click it. You don't have to be young or old. You can be any age, any species.
Any species.
Any species. We're all welcome.
If you can figure out how to use the computer.
And I really love that format. It's typically about an hour and a half talk. I've talked about the geology of the Humboldt nuclear power plant. That was a fun one.
Wow.
I've talked about the Tonga tsunami in January of 2022. I've talked about sources of North Coast earthquakes. And this fall, I will probably be talking about Iceland, where a ridge and hotspot collide. And it's kind of like Hawaii volcanism on steroids.
So is it erupting now?
It is erupting. Yes, it is erupting now. It's quieted. It's been in pretty much continuous eruption since 2021.
Wow.
Sort of periods of eruption, and then it quiets down. And
so our friend Laura's flying in 2 weeks to Iceland, to Reykjavik.
Yeah. Well, when I flew in to Reykjavik last July, we were welcomed by a nice little plume, and we spent our first day driving all around the eruption site. It was, for both my husband and I are earth scientists, and so
there you are.
It was heaven, absolutely.
I bet it's a really
absolute heaven.
Everybody said it's an amazing place.
It is.
Yeah, I want to go. It's a bucket list thing. Let's go way back for a second. Yep. Tell me, where did you grow up? What did you do before you became fully educated at Berkeley?
I grew up in the Palm Springs area. My parents had a guest ranch in Rancho Mirage, and I lived there from age 4, basically through high school.
Wow.
And it was a very special place because in those days, there weren't very many people.
Right.
And there was vast expanses of desert. And I was a horse kid. And on the guest ranch, we had a string of horses. And so I rode and rode and rode. I got to be a wild child in the desert.
Wow.
And there's something really wonderful about having that kind of freedom.
Yeah.
To both observe the land and appreciate it through different seasons and so forth.
Oh, I bet.
So I certainly never had any intention of going into science when I was in high school. Science was for nerds, and I wasn't going to be a nerd.
Right.
But fortunately, I learned later that actually science is for the really cool folks. I had taken 4 years of math in high school because I was good at math. I kept that a secret, but I was good at math. And so when I went to Berkeley as an undergraduate, arriving in 1964, just in time for the free speech movement.
Right.
And that was an education in itself. I dabbled in different majors. In those days, we were not allowed to declare a major until the beginning of our junior year. I think it's brilliant. I really wish it were still that way today. Yeah. Nowadays, we want to jam people into a major as quickly as possible and spit them out the door as soon as we can.
Right.
But in those days, it really was explore different things in those first 2 years.
Yeah.
And so I started out as a humanities field major. I was really interested in civilizations, but I hated classes with 2,000 people and exams where you wrote as fast as you could in a blue book and you thought you did well and you got a C and you thought you did crappy and you got an A. So there was like this disconnect. And then I was a journalism major for one semester. and had a wonderful teacher, an actual working reporter from San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
He was one of the better teachers I had, but he pushed us to do things that made us very uncomfortable, like go and bargain for something in a market and go and say something outrageous to someone on the street.
Wow.
The whole idea of being able to sort of push that journalistic envelope.
Comfort zone.
And I learned very quickly I did not want to be a reporter.
Not going to be.
But it's kind of interesting because now, of course, a lot of what I do is write for the Times Standard. So in a sense, I've come back to that. But I don't have to go and be abusive to people on the street, fortunately.
So you have your column, it's not my fault?
It's not my fault, which runs most Sundays in the Times Standard.
And what do you write about there?
Well, I write about sometimes there's an obvious news event. So a terrible earthquake in Japan or in Turkey. So sometimes I'll write about something that just came out in the news or in science. There was a real interesting paper a couple of weeks ago studying the offshore of what we call the Cascadia Subduction Zone, Oregon and Washington. So I wrote a column on that. Sometimes I write about historic things like Inga Lehmann, the woman who discovered the Earth's inner core. Fascinating story. So
Inga, was she Norwegian?
She was. And
go Norway.
Yep. Yeah. And she was at a time when she actually ran the country's seismic laboratory. This was back in the 1920s.
Wow.
So it's a really extraordinary story. So at any rate, back to Berkeley in the 1960s, and I'm an undergrad, and I'm forced to take a science class. I took botany the first year, and the second year I took the intro to geology. And it just because it fit into my schedule. And that particular semester, there was infighting going on in the geology department. And Professor Howell Williams, brilliant volcanologist, was on the outs with the current chair. And he was forced to teach this intro course for non-majors. And he had never taught it before, and it was his last semester of teaching. So it was definitely a punishment. And lots of stuff like that goes on in academia. But for me, it was fabulous because he taught the course exactly how he would have taught the majors course. And it was real, and it was fascinating. And he started out by saying, geology is a science, but it's as much an art form as it is a science. Wow. And if you don't appreciate the aesthetics of the earth and of what you're looking at, this is not the field for you. And it was like, oh, wow.
Art.
Oh, wow. Art and science together. And this was also the dawn of the era of plate tectonics, when people were still debating whether or not the outer part of our earth is in constant motion. And it was just fabulous. And then to add a little bit of excitement to it, I got a real crush on my teaching assistant. And so I had to come up with good questions to go and talk to him in his office hours.
Of course.
And there's nothing like being forced to ask questions about something to get yourself hooked. Right. So many years later, when I taught intro geology, one of the exercises I often had was to have people look at something and then ask me a question about it. Because asking a question is really one of the most fundamental things you can do in education. So
get curious.
At any rate, I thought, wow, this is so much more satisfying than these other courses. And so I talked to the department, and they said, well, at that time, they didn't recommend that women go into geology because they didn't allow women to attend summer field camp.
Wow.
Summer field camp was the capstone course, and it still is, as it is here. because you've got to go out in the field and be able to map the stuff and make up a story.
And live out in the woods, yeah.
Well, right, of course. And so, but they said I think there had been one or two women who had actually gotten degrees, but they had to go elsewhere to go to field camp, and they strongly discouraged it. But geophysics, they said, oh, that's fine. You can be a geophysicist. And I thought, oh, well, that sounds pretty cool. Geophysics, here I come. And it required, of course, a lot of math and a lot of physics. In fact, a lot more math and physics than geology courses. I only took 2 or 3 geology courses. But it was great. It was, so I was kind of my junior year trying to decide between being an art history major and being a geophysics major. And I figured the odds of getting a curatorship at the Prado were probably pretty small. So at any rate, that's how I got into geophysics. And fortunately, it fit me well. I didn't love math, but I could do it. I didn't love physics, but I could do it. And I really liked the whole tectonics aspect of geology and sort of beginning at the same time our whole understanding of how the Earth system works. So I slipped into that, and then I slipped into a graduate program. I didn't really want to go to graduate school, but everyone said I should do it, so I did it. And I ended up getting into rock mechanics and scanning electron microscopy. And any rate, it was just sort of these different opportunities kept opening up.
Wow.
And then
you did go to field camp.
No.
Oh, you
don't do field camp in geophysics.
Okay. Gotcha.
No, geophysics doesn't really deal with rocks per se. We're dealing with the deeper part of the Earth. We're dealing with seismology and geomagnetics and the shape of the Earth, bigger scale kinds of things.
Okay.
And so I've actually taught more different geology courses than I actually took as a student.
That's good. That's wonderful.
But it was it was good, and Berkeley in those days was the perfect place for me. And so I was very fortunate to come up to Humboldt. My husband had gotten a job. He got his degree about 2 years before I did. So he got a job first working for Redwood National Park and then working with the Forest Service, the research arm of the Forest Service in Arcata. And he got to know the whole geology crowd up here and sort of helped get me that first temporary job. And so we've just been very fortunate because Humboldt is about the best place on Earth to be.
I agree.
Into surface processes, geology, which is what my husband does, and active tectonics, earthquakes and tsunamis, which is what I do.
Yeah.
So we just could not have found a more perfect landing spot.
I was going to say ground zero, but I don't know if I want to say that. So back to Berkeley real quick, and then I want to go forward into tectonics, because that's a relatively new field based on when you were starting, right?
Well, it's a field that, I mean, the idea of tectonics has been around really since the 19th century, because the only way you can create this complex layered world is by moving stuff around. I mean, we know there are faults. I mean, we experience earthquakes and we see things, and we see these spectacular folds out in the field, and we see young rocks with a huge gap in time over much older ones. Sometimes we see really old rocks on top of younger rocks.
Go figure.
So there's a lot going on. So even before we had this global perspective that we now call plate tectonics, and that really starts in the 1960s. And it's still being refined. I mean, it's a model for the whole Earth system, but it doesn't give you all the details. And tectonics is basically just a fancy word of saying the forces that shape the Earth. Where do they come from? How do Earth materials respond? And what are, of course, the consequences for humans, which are enormous. I mean, we owe everything to geology. Without geology,
don't you forget it, folks.
We would not be here.
So we have a triple subduction zone. Is that what it's called off petroleum? There's 3 plates?
When we talk about plate tectonics, the simple view is that most of the exciting things that are happening on the planet, like the earthquakes, the volcanic areas, the current active mountain building zones, are restricted to relatively narrow parts of the Earth's surface. And that leaves much of the planet relatively quiet tectonically in terms of those forces. And the plate tectonic model says, kind of imagine that we have a somewhat, not quite fully hard-boiled egg. And the outermost shell is broken into 12 major pieces. There are some minor pieces as well. But the white directly underneath the shell is not completely solid. It's not molten, but it's able to slowly move, kind of like molasses. And so these shells, these 12 or so major shells, are able to move relative to one another. In some places, they spread apart, as they're doing in the middle of the Atlantic, with Europe and North America and Africa and South America moving further apart all the time as we sit here.
Yeah.
And we can measure that. In other areas, they're colliding together. We've got the Himalayas, where the Indian subcontinent began that collision maybe 45 million years ago. And it's slowed down maybe half as much as it's still plowing in. And
so we can measure
yes.
Everest and see it's getting bigger.
And that's where we have the highest mountains on Earth. And then we have other major mountain chains.
And then
like
underwater.
the Andes.
And then ocean bottom.
Right. So we have these zones where one of these pieces of the eggshell is being pushed into another or being pulled underneath. That's our setting right here. So if I were to drill straight down from where we're sitting about 8 miles beneath our feet, we'd hit the top of one of these other plates that's being pulled by gravity beneath us. It surfaces offshore, roughly 40 miles off the coast here. And as I say, it's about 8 miles here. By the time you get to Willow Creek, closer to 12 miles. By the time you get to Mount Shasta, it's about 60 miles.
And how many miles, how deep would it be in the ocean? You're saying
well,
it's exposed?
as I say, it hits the surface. It's this great dipping ramp.
Okay.
So it covers, at one point it covered much of the Pacific Ocean. Now that ridge is only about 180 miles off the coast where it's being created. We call that the Gorda Ridge. But so we're in one of these areas of compression we refer to as a subduction zone. And then we have places where the two plates are basically moving horizontally, like cars on the freeway. A good example of that is the San Andreas plate boundary system, where the stuff to the west is moving to the northwest relative to the rest of North America. So these major plate boundaries, whether we have spreading or rifting, whether we have subduction or colliding together or side by side, define the boundaries of these 12 major zones, plates, where things within them are relatively quiet.
Right.
In some places, we have two plates in contact. like along the San Andreas Fault Zone.
Sure.
There are a few places where we actually have 3 plates in contact. We call that a triple junction.
And that's right off the shore right here.
And we have a triple junction in the vicinity of Cape Mendocino.
Right down there.
And it's not a point. You think of it more as a large zone. If you put a pin in Petrolia and drew maybe a 20-mile arc around it, and again, the boundary's not sharp, that's where we have these 3 plates in contact.
Wow.
Now, there are some places on the planet that have 4 plates in contact. Yay, Japan!
Wow.
Which is one of the reasons that Japan has so much going on.
Lots.
But the triple junction is interesting tectonically. Is certainly very important in terms of the evolution of California, the California coast. That triple junction, roughly 40 million years ago, didn't exist at all. We were just a huge subduction zone along the entire coast. And then a ridge hit the subduction zone and the San Andreas Fault was born in the vicinity of 38 or so million years ago. And since then, it's been slowly growing. So 10 million years ago, it was roughly in the vicinity of the San Francisco Bay Area. It arrived up in our neck of the woods a couple million years ago. And 20 million years from now, it's going to be somewhere in Oregon.
Yeah.
And we will no longer have a triple junction here. We'll be part of the San Andreas system.
Interesting.
So one of the things you have to realize with a geologic perspective is that nothing ever stays the same. It's constantly changing. And those changes affect the distribution of oceans and continents. That affects the flow, the currents within the oceans. It affects climate.
Wow.
So we've certainly had periods in the past where the climate was much hotter than what it is today. And some of those seem to be associated with times where all the continents were basically in one huge supercontinent. And the ocean flow, everything else was pretty much ocean. And that seems to be a scenario that creates very hot, has created hot climates in the past.
Did you ever work with Dr. Richard Stepp?
I knew Dick Stepp.
Dick Stepp.
I knew him quite well.
What a great guy.
I actually taught briefly in the physics. I taught a physics lab one semester. But no, Dick was always very supportive.
He taught us weather and cluster programs.
Yes.
It was great.
Yep.
He said something really profound. He was talking about the jet stream, and he had a rope, and his analogy was this big map of the U.S., and he moved the rope north and south, and he said, somebody said, what causes the weather, Dr. Stepp? And he thought, and he goes, the weather causes itself. I'll never, ever forget that. He was terrific. Terrific. I don't know if it's accurate, but he was a lovely guy.
Well, I suppose the weather definitely affects the weather, but what causes the weather is the fact that we have the sun, we have a planet
Tides.
We live on.
Ocean.
The part near the equator is hot. The part at the poles are cold.
And then there's
we have
weather.
A rotating body. That means that we don't get nice, simple convection from the equator to the pole, because that's what we want to do, is move the hot air to the cold, heat the cold up. Because the planet rotates, it ends up twisting these convective cycles into a series of zones. No surprise that the equatorial zone is wet and warm, but at about 30 degrees north and south, it's very dry. So if you look at the great deserts in the Southwest, and you look at the Sahara, they're in that classic dry zone because of these convective cycles. And up here, we're in the roaring 40s.
Yeah.
where we get some of the most consistent big winds again.
Yeah.
So, yeah, weather causes weather, but
there's some other stuff.
Rotation and the sun and the position of the earth are really important.
I was going to do a shout out to Dick. I'm not sure if he's alive. Is he still living? I know he was in Philbrook for many years.
Yeah, I actually
terrific guy. He was my guy that got me excited about weather and education, because when he talked, he would squeak a little. He got real pitchy and he would get real excited. He was a fun guy to learn under. Real quick, going back to Berkeley with you, what was going on outside of the classroom that caught your attention or that you remember? Was there?
Well,
it was crazy days, right?
As I say, 1964. I'm 17. A freshman, and coming down to one of my classes, and there's this row of Oakland police in full riot gear.
Oh, wow.
Preventing me from getting into the classroom. That was the first I had any idea of what was going on.
Huh.
I mean, what you have to realize is that the whole free speech movement was born of a very tiny event that escalated because of the way the administration handled it. So there were a group of very active students, and in those days, SNCC, the Students for Democratic Society, and there were a number of other organizations that were really big in going to the South and the integration issues and so forth. And they had a little table set up on Sproul Hall, raising money and trying to get volunteers involved.
Sure.
And most of the students were just like me and walked right on past, paid no attention. I was trying to decide whether I was going to pledge a sorority that fall. I did not. It was not my thing. But at any rate, the campus decided they had to be evicted, and as a result, the police presence on campus and yada, yada, yada. And so what the response did was you took 26,000 students who were generally apathetic, and in 24 hours, you radicalized them.
Wow.
And so very quickly, I lived in a dorm, and everybody in the dorm was, I mean, not everybody, but almost everybody was suddenly very, very supportive of what was going on. And Mario Savio was very eloquent, and I actually got to know him later on. I was one of the few people that had a car. I had a little Volkswagen Beetle, a 58 Volkswagen Beetle, and I became a driver for the free speech movement, and I would drive Mario Savio and other people around because very few students in those days had cars. Sure. And then I got to know his ex-wife many years later and his son, because our kids were at in a daycare center together, and I continued to be friends with her. So, but it was kind of like everyone wanted to volunteer to do something, and it was like doing laundry for Mario Savio, like pieces of the True Cross. You couldn't believe how much laundry was being done in the dormitories because everyone thought they were washing Mario Savio's clothes.
So he was a key leader in the free speech.
He was a key leader. He became the real spokesperson, very, very eloquent.
Interesting.
And I met a number of the other people involved who were not at all impressive. I mean, Mario was a real idealist, and he was chewed to pieces in later years. Whereas a number of the other people, let's just say I would not have wanted to hang out with them because they were just into agitating. That was all they wanted to do.
Pretty big difference.
Real big difference. And so that was perhaps the biggest education of my freshman year was learning to recognize the difference between a true idealist
right.
and an agitator.
Yeah. If time allowed, I'd love to hear your perspective
Sure.
on the occupation a few months ago, but I don't want to really go there quite yet.
And I don't have very much to say.
I'm
not on campus.
So bringing it home to Humboldt, and your mission personally is to educate us, the populace, your community, and telling us about, hey, tsunami and earthquake preparedness. What does that look like? So you put together the tsunami preparedness program with a team.
With a team. It's very important.
And then they've replicated this up and down the coast?
A lot of it. We're very fortunate, again, our little Goldilocks County, for many reasons. And when it comes to earthquakes and tsunamis, first of all, we have them. Mm-hmm. So we have more earthquakes, more large earthquakes,
and opportunities,
and more tsunamis than any other part of the lower 48 states. We also have no big research institute here. We don't have a USGS research station here. We don't have a Research One university here. Right. We're pretty much kind of on our own. And up until, I'd say, really only the last decade or so, there hasn't been a whole lot of interest from outside geologists in our area, which I've always wondered about because it's the most fascinating place on the planet as far as I'm. But we don't have a lot of people. So, but eventually, the last 2 people to die in a California earthquake were in our December 2022 earthquake. Those were not related to ground shaking. Those were people who are probably scared to death.
They had heart attacks, right?
Yes.
Coronary.
They had, and that often happens in earthquakes, is that they can be very, very frightening.
But their fatalities attributed to the earthquake.
They are considered earthquake-related fatalities. So when you look at the list, you'll see the two most recent. But what I have found with studying disasters, and certainly earthquakes and tsunamis in particular, and I've traveled all over the world. I've studied tsunamis in Papua New Guinea, earthquakes and tsunamis in Japan, in Indonesia, in Peru, in Chile, in Samoa. So it kind of takes me right back to my original interest when I was an undergrad at Berkeley, which is civilizations. How do civilizations function? And there's nothing like a disaster to really show you how a civilization functions or does not. So you look at, the Chile earthquake, magnitude 8.7 in 2010, February 2010.
That was a big one.
It was a huge earthquake. Over 17 million people experienced very strong ground shaking.
How many deaths?
And the total number of deaths in that earthquake was roughly 500. And of those, about a fifth were related to tsunami. But when you look at the size of that earthquake, the area of really strong ground shaking, it was impressive how well the country performed. And I was there 2 weeks afterwards, and almost all the highways were already open. I mean, they were damaged. Interesting thing about that is in Chile, they really rely, their highway, their interstate sort of system is all privatized. And there's this incentive for the company, I mean, they're all toll roads, to get them functioning as fast as possible.
Quickly as
they're
you can.
insured. And as I said, 2 weeks afterwards, almost all the roads we could drive on. They weren't charging tolls because the roads weren't perfectly in great shape.
But the franchise had to come back online.
Right, exactly. But that was, but the lesson from that was how having being a first world country, and Chile is very much like being in Southern California. The architecture, the climate, it's a wonderful place.
I've heard it's great.
It's absolutely a wonderful place.
We're in Santiago?
Well, we flew in and out of Santiago, but I was mainly on the coast because we were mainly studying the
Is
tsunami.
it down the coast where they had the...
Well, the earthquake was centered just offshore in Biobío region. And so Constitución was the city, perhaps the largest city closest to the Concepción. And Constitución were two of the cities that were pretty close. But it was a huge, long rupture. It was more than 100 miles long.
Wow.
And so, people get this idea that earthquake's a spot because you see the epicenter on a map. Once you get to a magnitude 7.5 earthquake, forget the spot.
It's more like a tear.
It's so our 1906 San Francisco earthquake, the spot was roughly where the Golden Gate Bridge is, just offshore of that. Wow. But it ruptured from Santa Cruz all the way to Cape Mendocino.
Rad.
And so the source is really that whole area. There's nothing about the spot where it begins that means the shaking is any stronger there. In fact, we had some of the strongest shaking anywhere on that whole rupture zone back in 1906.
How big was that one?
We now call it a 7.9.
Wow.
So roughly an 8.
Okay.
So, any rate, I just find that how communities deal with issues, and certainly natural disasters are an important one.
It defines them.
It is a real sign of how healthy you are. And if you read Jared Diamond's Collapse, you'll find that natural disasters are often the trigger for collapse. We've certainly in our time seen that in Haiti, that Haiti was certainly dysfunctional before 2010.
And then real bad.
But the 2010 earthquake really just pulled the rug out from under the country.
Right.
So it really behooves us to understand our hazards, and it's our responsibility as individuals, as communities, as counties, to be very actively involved in what we now call resilience.
Speaking of which,
yes,
you brought me some of your magazines, the Shaky Ground. Thank you for these. Tell us, I guess the $2 question is, so I'll just pick on Joni and I. How can we as a family, as a couple in McKinleyville, it's right up there on the map, how do we get involved? How do we become part of the solution and the reaction that's positive? Not if, but when this is going to happen. Tsunami or earthquake in Humboldt.
Well, the good news is the first step is really easy. And I know this because social scientists have really studied what motivates people to actually take action. And step one is you need to talk about it. So the very first thing you need to do is you and Joni need to talk about, okay, what are our hazards? And so this little magazine is a really nice primer for how to go about it. There's something that we call the 7 steps to earthquake safety, which starts out with having the talk and thinking about what are your special circumstances. Do you have an elderly or disabled or person living in your home? Do you have somebody who needs a power supply? Do you have a ranch? Do you have livestock? Do you have animals? What are your sort of personal circumstances? Then what are your hazards? So, okay, do I live in a tsunami zone? Do I not live in a tsunami zone? If you don't live in a tsunami zone, you don't really need to worry about evacuating.
We have maps for that here.
We do have maps, but the maps won't save you.
Okay.
You need to be aware. We call it situational awareness. And this is true for life in our modern world. You need to have your feelers out for, okay, is there kind of a sketchy situation developing up ahead? Maybe I don't want to walk that way.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing with hazards. And it's not just for earthquakes and tsunamis. Right now, it's fire weather.
Right.
And it's really important to pay attention, to be able to be contacted. Now, in almost all of California counties, there is an emergency notification system, but it doesn't happen automatically. You need to sign up for it. And right now, we have this fire that's developed in southern Humboldt County.
Heard about that.
You're not going to get a WEA alert, wireless emergency alert, on your phone for that because it's a localized area. But if you live in Alder Point or Garberville or any of those communities, you want to know, you want to make sure that you get notified and signing up for that notification system, being aware of which local radio stations. KMUD is wonderful, especially for fire season and Southern Humboldt. But KMUD, they've done a great job. KHSU was once great. Forget it. They don't do anything anymore.
Right.
So, being aware of what and knowing how to scan, your dial, but signing up for that emergency notification doesn't cost you anything. You can put up to 6 different contact, like if you want notifications for where your children's school is or where your parents live or where your working place is. You can get notifications for more than one location.
Technology.
You do need to update it because, of course, once you've changed your phone number, then they're not going to
Can't find you.
But that's one of those things that is really, it's a lot harder to get people to pay attention nowadays than it was 30, 40 years ago. Because we all listen to different media channels.
A lot of voices.
And some people don't listen to anything at all.
Right.
And especially in the more remote areas of the county.
Right.
It's really important. You need to know if a fire is developing and you need to be prepared to get out of there. You don't ever wait to the last minute.
Fire is a great example. Yeah. So I want to know a little bit about you. So usually this is the part of the show where I have a hotel bell and I ring my bell, but my producer has hid my bell. So I want to know.
Ding, ding, ding.
Ding, ding. There, thank you. The part of the show where we find out about what Lori likes and just off the top of your head, don't overthink it if you want to take a pass to it. So you've traveled the world. Question number 1. You've traveled the world. Top 3 countries you'd love to go back to.
Oh, that's easy.
Or cities.
France.
I think I'm going to get a bell here in a minute.
France, Iceland, and probably somewhere in South America.
Okay.
would be the top 3 that I would.
Chile.
Japan. Japan I've been to so often. I should include Japan as well. I've had 11 trips to Japan.
I have a bell now.
Oh, good. And I feel like it's not a second home, but certainly the closest thing to another place abroad. But I love to travel. My family had a tour business, and I sort of grew up with this sense of the importance of travel. That the family business started out as bicycling tours for young people in Europe in the 1930s.
How cool is that?
And I took one of those tours in summer of 64, a bicycle tour of Europe.
Where'd you, all over Europe?
All over Europe, 3 months.
We leave for Amsterdam in 10 days.
Yeah.
Where there's lots of bikes.
Oh, yes.
All over.
Yeah.
Utrecht. And we're going to go down to Ghent. Hey, question number 2. The best meal you've had in your travels, or one of them.
Japan 2016.
Oh, wow.
Nagoya.
There's a date.
I had been invited to be the keynote speaker at the National Museum, the Tokyo National Museum's 5-year remembrance of the tsunami.
All right.
And it was wonderful. I got this paid trip to Japan. And I was primarily talking about the boat Kamome, this little boat that beached in Crescent City,
right.
and through the efforts of many people, and I played a small role in it, it was returned to Japan and it connected these 2 communities that are now sister cities.
Wow.
It's an absolutely fabulous story. But we were in Nagoya and walking. We had done a 5-day hike with dear friends in one of these traditional pilgrimage trails near Kyoto. Mm-hmm. And on the way back, as I said, we had this one night and we were just trying to figure out, where are we going to eat? And we see this sign in Japanese that had all sorts of fish on it and with an arrow. And so there was this tiny little restaurant 2 floors up that was fish, you name it. And I don't think a Caucasian had ever been into this restaurant before, but we just stumbled up there. And it was the most incredible 2 hours of our lives where they kept bringing us one thing after another. There was one thing where they would bring all the fish. You'd choose your fish for one of the courses. And any rate, I don't think I'll ever have a meal that will
that sounds magical.
Beat that ever again.
Sounds really good.
Although there have been a number of others that have been we had a pretty great closing party at Tisa's Tattoo Bar in Samoa.
Well, that sounds good.
Pretty remarkable as well.
At a tattoo bar.
Well, this particular it was a little informal resort that also specialized in traditional Samoan tattoos. So I did not get a tattoo, but it was a wonderful place
that sounds
to
great.
be.
Okay. You've done good on 2 questions so far. Question number 3. If you have a day in Humboldt, where do you want to go hiking?
Well, of course, that depends on what the weather's doing.
Okay. That's fair enough.
Weather dependent. I mean, I do go hiking every single day in Humboldt County because I have a border collie.
Oh.
And Pip has to go for a walk. And we're in a wonderful dog walking group.
Yeah.
So there's anywhere between 3 to 12 of us on a typical
That's
day's
a lot of
walk.
people, yeah.
And dogs. And today was a Malel walk. Yesterday was in Blue Lake. I mean, we walk all over the place.
Very nice.
And so it's definitely something I do every day, but I certainly have a number of real favorite walks. I love going inland when it's not too hot. Up to Cold Spring off of Titlow Hill Road is wonderful. Lax Creek is a fabulous place to go.
Reese Hughes likes that.
Yes.
Place.
Well, Reese was the one.
He would know.
That's Reese and Amy were the ones we went on that pilgrimage walk with in Japan.
Cool.
So
that's cool.
So that's wonderful. The Asagan Trail up in Prairie Creek.
What's the one on Titlow Hill again?
Cold Spring.
Okay.
And that's absolutely wonderful.
Is it off of 299 as you go up?
Yeah, you take Titlow Hill Road, and then you just keep driving. Google Maps has it.
Sure.
You just do Cold Spring. And there's take a little turn off the road. And
is there a creek?
Yes, there is. There's a spring.
There's an
that's why it's called Cold Spring.
Imagine that. Not like Blue Lake where there's no lake.
But there's also these beautiful big knockers, these rocks that lots of time you'll see climbers there working on them, and beautiful wildflowers, fabulous view looking down Redwood Creek Valley. And
I love it.
So, yes, that's one of the things about Humboldt County is that there are so many world-class hikes within 45 minutes. Bald Hills, again, fabulous.
Yep.
So,
what's the trail all the way up Bald Hills? Is it Lions?
There's Lions Ranch, but there are a number of other trails. Yeah. Sort of, if you go past the Lions Ranch trail, there's another.
We like the Redwood Creek trail that we did. We did it last week.
Yeah.
The real flat one that goes up to the creek.
Yeah.
And it was just lovely.
Oh, yeah.
Swimming, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And then Jody's been hiking behind the Simpson or the Green Diamond Land behind McKinleyville. They just opened that up.
Right, the community forest.
Yeah. She says that's really fun and not a lot of use quite yet.
Right.
Which is great. And the Hammond Trail, named after my great-great-great-grandfather, Jedediah Hammond. Somebody's going to go, I'm going to fact check that.
Uh-huh.
Well, any parting shots? What do we want to have? What do you have on your gravestone? What do you want them to say at your celebration of life? What would you like to be known for?
Well, I hope that people will smile. I sometimes have my reputation. I mean, I remember back in '92 after the '92 quakes, people would sort of see me and go, "Oh no, there comes the earthquake," and I'm going. No, it's not. I'm not an earthquake, and that's not my fault.
Just a messenger.
But really, the bottom line is community matters, and the health of the community matters, especially in disasters, but even when there aren't disasters. And we are social creatures. We have evolved a kind of asocial way of living. And so every opportunity to sort of break down the silos, and you'll feel better for doing so. And you'll be safer in the next earthquake.
I like that. Any words on your gravestone?
I probably won't have one. So
we had several people that said they want to
blowing in the wind.
There you go. I love it. Well, thanks for coming, Lori. Appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
And we will take that to heed. Let's repeat one more time. Where do we find you? Where do we find this?
Here.
Where do we find your websites that your favorite?
So
shout out.
Fortunately, we actually have the wonderful team, the Redwood Coast Tsunami Work Group. All you have to do is Redwood Coast Tsunami Work Group, and you'll go straight to our website.
Okay.
We're on Facebook. RCTWG. That's actually one of the better places to get rapidly updated information. So when there's a significant earthquake, tsunami, and I'm getting information, that's where I post is on the RCTWG Facebook page. Just because it's the easiest, fastest way for me to get it out.
Sure.
And anyone is welcome to get copies of our brand new 2024 edition of Living on Shaky Ground. Amy Uwecki did the artwork, much of the artwork in this, Reese's partner.
Shout out to Reese and Amy. Hi, Reese.
Oh, yes.
Hi, Amy.
They make work fun.
Super nice.
And don't let the fear take this part of your life away from you. And I actually wrote a column about 3 weeks ago on earthquakes and fear. You can also find all of my columns archived on our website.
Thanks again for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.